All right, as promised, we're going to pick up with Mark Yancey. Mark is running in the Republican primary against John Cornyn. The website, you want to get a head start on things, is go to voteformark.com, voteformark.com, and he joins us here live on Chris X Radio. Mark Yancey, thank you so much for your time this afternoon and joining us here on Chris X Radio.
Well, thank you, Chris, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Appreciate the invitation to be on your show.
Absolutely. Good to have you on. So you've jumped in that primary race. And I know we spoke with a guy, Dwayne Stovall, who's running against John Cornyn. He came on, it was a few weeks back, I guess. And then now here you are in the same race. Now, this was a big Senate seat in the great state of Texas. What made you decide to jump in and say, this is it, I'm going to go get this guy out of here and take over in Texas?
Well, let me start off by saying that I know of Dwayne. I don't know him personally, but I would assure your listeners that either Dwayne or I could do a better job of managing the Senate seat than Mr. Cornyn. My interest in getting in the race was I'm 33 years in the private sector and have built 4 successful businesses, Chris, employing hundreds of people with well-paying jobs. And so, my businesses have been tied to the capital markets, and I've paid extraordinarily close attention to the fiscal mess that has been created up in Washington, where, in fact, it was affecting our business as we tried to manage that going forward. We, in fact, at the last business that I just stepped away from to run the Senate race, we had to lay off 2 people because of some government regulations. We're regulated by the SEC and FINRA and some other things that perhaps your listeners, well, they probably were with the SEC, but FINRA perhaps not. Yeah. So my interest is that, the federal government, in my opinion, is headed down a perilous path. I want to work to get to shrink the federal government, to get federal government out of our lives, particularly out of businesses. You know, Chris, probably as well as I do, that most of the jobs in the 50 states are created by small businesses like mine, and a lot of these businesses are impacted by still a lot of the Obama regulations that were put in place. I think President Trump has done a wonderful job of using the power of the pen to take a lot of those away. Certainly the corporate tax rate being reduced down to 21% is a big help to big corporations. It's not necessarily a big help for small companies, though. So, firms that are employing, say, less than 50 employees that have revenue that's, say, less than $5 million, it's not a big help there. So, I have some big plans to, listen, we've got, Chris, infrastructure bills that are waiting. We've got, border security immigration bills waiting. We've got drug prescription bills waiting. There is absolutely nothing taking place while this impeachment, what I would call charade, takes place in Washington. And keep in mind, as your listeners probably know, that the Democrats, since in 2016, when Donald Trump was nominated by 64 million Americans to be our next president, the Democrats in the House have been trying to nullify that because they didn't get their party of choice. Yeah. And I think that's absolutely shameful. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to find that that's going to come back to bite the Democrats in a real serious way. So I'm a big supporter of President Trump. Look, I mean, some of his behavior and some of the way he talks. Look, I mean, we all have our own ways of doing things. You do, I'm sure. I do as well. And are we all perfect in terms of the way we communicate? And the answer to that's no. And I think the president probably falls in the same category. But I would also tell you along the same lines is that President Trump has accomplished more in 3.5 years than the past 2 presidents have accomplished in this case in the 12 years that they were in office.
It's been virtually no contest compared to what he's done, compared to what the previous presidents did, or what the other people told us they were going to do, which is
that's right.
So now, and I was checking out for those who want to follow along. We're talking with Mark Yancey. He's running in the Republican primary against John Cornyn. The website voteformark.com if you want to go check it out. And as I was perusing your website and looking at some of the stuff, you're fairly conservative on, and I say fairly, I'm use that very loosely. You're conservative on almost all issues. I was looking at border security, the Second Amendment. I kind of wanted to get your take a little bit on, and maybe you can touch on either like what you think about student loans and education. Maybe you can kick off with those, and then we'll try to, before we run out of time, talk a little bit about border security, Second Amendment, that kind of stuff as well.
Sure, and I'll get to these real quickly. Look, we've turned student loans into a profit center for the government. So over the last 5 years, the federal government has profited off our students that are the future of our country and our society to the tune, Chris, of $135 billion. It shouldn't be that way. We have privatized many of those loans where you've got so I won't mention any names, but they're private entities that are in the business of loaning kids that really want to get an education, want to better themselves. And I've studied this quite a bit, where they are being charged what I call usury rates, where in some cases these kids are being charged 12 and 13%. And that is absolutely absurd. With the Federal Reserve now, with the Fed funds rate down at 150 basis points, or 1.5%, and we're charging kids almost 12%, or in some cases higher than 12%, it's absolutely absurd, and it must stop. When kids get out of college, they have hope, and they need hope. And when you get out of college, I have two daughters. I've been fortunate enough to get them through college, but look, there are parents, including myself, who we had our own student loans. Is that when you have to pay a car payment, and most kids do, and a rent payment, and then you have, on top of that, you're being burdened with this enormous student loan. It just doesn't work, Chris. It's got to stop. And the bottom line, if you hear nothing else, we should not be profiting off students who are trying to improve themselves and learn in either a public or a private setting. It must stop. Yeah. I want to touch on one other thing regarding education, if I may, and I'll be real quick with this.
Sure.
Our teachers in the state of Texas are grossly underpaid. My plan for teachers is within the first 90 days is to increase teacher pay across the board by $8,000. That $8,000 would put them above the national average, which is about 60,000. So the Texas average now is about $54,000. You bump it by $8,000, it puts them just about at what the national average is for teachers, which is roughly around $60,000 in change or so. So I want to do that in a couple of ways, and I'll be real quick with this. One is, you remember going back to the date when the lottery was put in place, and with Ann Richards buying the first ticket back in November, I believe it was 1994. You remember the promises and all the ads that were made that 100% of the lottery proceeds would go to education. That's absolutely been a fraud, and that's been not only under Cornyn's watch, but there's many other people that have seen that money is not going to education. So in the spirit of time here with you, I would go back, and I would make sure that there's a larger allocation of the lottery money, which was the intent of the lottery, is to fund the teachers. And also, as you'll see on my website, your listeners, I would abolish the Department of Education back in Washington, which is a worthless bureaucratic mess that costs the American taxpayer somewhere in the tune of $80 billion and does absolutely nothing.
God, yeah, it's pure insanity. No, and it's kind of like when you talk about the way they've done that with the lottery. It's similar but different. I equate it right there with the toll roads. Don't worry, once these toll roads are paid for, then we'll stop charging, and they never do. They never stop.
Yeah.
So because it's such a huge source of revenue.
Well, listen, when you give, and listen, I don't like the politician word. I look at the P in politician as people and prosperity, and I don't want to be called a politician. I'm not a politician. If I'm fortunate to get through this March 3rd primary, which I believe I will, I'm for term limits. I believe that senators should not go up and park in Washington for as long as Mr. Cornyn has. They get intoxicated with their self-importance. They forget about the constituents who elected them, send them to Washington to get the people's work done of the state of Texas. That's exactly where John Cornyn is now. He acts differently in Washington than what he does in Texas. He votes differently than what he espouses in the state of Texas. And so I don't like all these funny words that people use and rhinos and all that type of stuff. So I don't use that. But I will tell you that Mr. Cornyn votes more like a Democrat than he does a Republican, and I would say that he is not a conservative. He is a Democrat, and so you can put any type of wording on that you want, but I'll just leave it at that.
Well, yeah, we are short on time. You mentioned you're for the Second Amendment. You're strong on border security, so we don't do that. In the final time that we have here, I would like to ask you this, because one thing about Mr. Cornyn is you're right. He's been there a long time, and exactly what you said about term limits, I'm completely behind that. But these guys get in there. Here's my question. He's a very well-funded candidate. He's got the name recognition. He's very difficult to beat, which is why he's been there for so long. What makes you stand out differently, I guess, than anybody else that could come and unseat this guy and then eventually go on and take on the Democrats in the general?
Well, look, we believe, and I'm not going to disparage anyone on the Democratic side, but and I've been with them. I know them all. They're very nice people on the Democratic side. We spent a day over in East Texas with all the Democratic, and they're very nice people. But obviously, there's not one thing they say that I agree with. But nonetheless, they're very nice people. Look, I am fully cognizant that Mr. Cornyn is surrounded by the GOP elites. And it's also my position that if Cornyn is to make it through March 3rd, he will not have won the March 3rd primary. He would have been placed in that election because he has the establishment behind him. I don't believe for a second that money means listen, money helps in terms of getting through things. We have money. Cornyn's got 11, 12, 13, whatever the number is. We have money. We're getting people. I won't take PAC money. I won't take big donor money. I don't go to these big dinners where where you're getting all this stuff that Cornyn does. You go to his website, look where he's getting his money from. All of it's coming from I shouldn't say all of it, about 90% of it's coming from PAC type stuff. Chris, are not oblivious to how the arduous task of doing this. We believe it can be done. I would be honored for the people, your listeners, if for me to serve as your senator, and they're interested in hearing from me, to write to me. My information's on my website. I try to respond to every email that people send me. I can't guarantee I can get to 100% of them, but we get so many of them. But I do my very best, sometimes working 15, 16-hour days. But this is a grassroots, what I call revolution to unseat an incumbent senator that's got the GOP elites surrounding him, and that is a very tall task. But listen, we work, Chris, every day. It'll take what we want to do, and I want your listeners to know as a final note is that we want to be the change agent for the folks of Texas, all 28 million, 16 million of you voters that'll stand with me, and we're trying to take 1,000 of Texans that will donate $3 to $5 to my campaign by Thanksgiving for us to move forward to help this to send a real conservative to Washington. There's a lot of work to be done, and I can tell your listeners that Mr. Cornyn is not paying attention to Texans. He's paying attention to Mitch McConnell, and I could go on. But look, the people of Texas sent him there to work for Texans, not for Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, that's what we're looking for, somebody to work for Texas. Mark Yancey, thanks for taking the time. We're way over. I appreciate it. The website is voteformark.com. Mark, I appreciate your time coming on the program today. Good luck in your race. It's definitely going to be it's a tough race. It always is. Politics are not easy, and it's expensive. And it's
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris, for having me. I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Once again, Mark Yancey. The website is voteformark.com. Voteformark.com. You want to go find out more information.